Now, before I take questions, I would like to address an extremely dishonest narrative that we've seen emerging over the past few days. Many outlets in this room have been fear-mongering the American people into believing there is a constitutional crisis taking place here at the White House. I've been hearing those words a lot lately. But in fact, the real constitutional crisis is taking place within our judicial branch, where district court judges in liberal districts across the country are abusing their power to unilaterally block President Trump's basic executive authority.
Top of the morning to you, lads and lassies. I know I'm a day early, but happy St. Patrick's Day. Today is Sunday, March 16th, and I hope all is well with all of you. And as you could tell from the opening clip, today's conversation is going to be regarding a constitutional crisis. So that's a term that's being thrown around a lot. It was thrown around quite often in the 2016 administration of President Trump. So we're going to break it down, and just for full transparency, because you guys know how I roll, you can see that I had to jot down some stuff on my laptop. We're working on figuring out some sort of teleprompter app, so I don't have to kind of glance off to the side. That's a work in progress. But so today we are going to be talking about that. And I want to start with talking about what the Democrats are saying is a constitutional crisis.
We are seeing an executive branch that has decided that they are no longer going to abide by the Constitution in honoring Congress's role in the creation of the agencies, in their role in deciding where money is allocated. And so the only recourse we have, since our congressional leadership, the Speaker, will not stop the executive, is through the judiciary. And this is, when you think about the checks and balances that we have, the courts are the only recourse we have at the moment. And we have seen, and when we talk about the illegality of what the executive is doing, we have seen every single executive order that has been challenged in the courts was found to be illegal. Wow. And that, I think, should give faith to the American people that our courts are working as they should. The checks and balances are working. What is not working is the way that the executive is behaving and the congressional leadership that is failing the American people.
Well, you keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
So, as you can hear, they're basically saying that the executive orders that President Trump is issuing are creating a constitutional crisis. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the basics. What is a constitutional crisis? What constitutes as a constitutional crisis? In layman's terms, it is a situation in which a major political dispute cannot be clearly resolved on the basis of the particular government's constitution or established practice. Critics have warned of a constitutional crisis if the legislator insists that it has the sole power to remove him. So him in this context being President Trump. So basically it boils down to a significant disagreement in respect to the separation of powers or federalism. So what is the separation of powers? Let's start there. Here in the United States, there exists three branches: the executive, the judicial, and the legislative, which is Congress, that is comprised of the Senate and the House of Representatives. So for those of you who either forgot civics or, skipped civics or, cut class, there you go. So I'm going to give you some examples of what it looks like for a constitutional crisis. So it could be where one branch of government actively works to undermine another branch, or looks to expand its own powers with complete disregard for the other. The second example could be where the federal branches of government seek to reverse the authority of the states. And that, in and of itself, inherently could potentially violate your Ninth Amendment, which protects rights that are not stated in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, and the 10th Amendment, which clarifies that powers not specifically given to federal government nor prohibited in the states as reserved to the states or its people. So there have been some articles that I've come across, one in particular, which I'm going to share with you, written by Jeffrey Rosen. So if you've watched my video on the power of words, and I made references to Orwell's 1984 and things like newspeak or doublespeak, this is an example of that. And this was an interview conducted by NPR with Jeffrey Rosen, who is the executive of the National Constitution Center. It's a partisan organization. It is a left-leaning organization. There was one specific part that I want to bring to your attention. So right here, the interviewer asks, how far is Trump pushing the limits of his executive authority under the Constitution, which limits presidential powers with checks and balances from other branches of government? Rosen, well, the definition of a constitutional crisis is very high. It's when the president openly defies an unambiguous Supreme Court ruling, and no president in his American history has done that, and President Trump hasn't done that either. So in that sense, we are not yet in a constitutional crisis. Okay, so I would agree. This ideology that's being thrown around that we are in a constitutional crisis is not actually what's happening. And I think what upset me was the fact that he said that there has been no sitting president that has ever bucked or ignored the Supreme Court's ruling. That is literally a blatant lie. So if you think that, I want you to go ask someone of the Cherokee Nation how they feel about that statement. Andrew Jackson famously stated in the Supreme Court's decision after the case of Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, when the courts decided that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign entity and Georgia's laws did not apply, which subsequently led to the forced removal of the Cherokee people from their lands in the event now known as the Trail of Tears. He famously said, Andrew Jackson famously said, now let's see them enforce it. This is what forced the Cherokee people to be relocated to Oklahoma. So for Jeffrey Rosen to try to twist history to fit his narrative, when you have people like me out there who are kind of like, are you kidding me? That's not true. There's been several instances of constitutional crises, even in events where the ends justified the means. And a great example of that is the Civil War. When the Southern states seceded from the Union, with the ideas of freedom and equality and the states' rights to decide within its own borders regarding slavery called into question, that is a very good example of what would be considered a constitutional crisis. And we have other examples as well. So here we have a more recent example of what I would consider a constitutional crisis. And I know a lot of people would agree with this. This is a photo of New York City during the COVID lockdowns in 2020. So The Democrats crying that this is a constitutional crisis, that we are experiencing or on the brink of a constitutional crisis with Trump. I just want to remind you that these are the same people who shut everything down 5 years ago, shut the country down, shut down public spaces, beaches, parks, but my doctor's office couldn't be open. Target, Walmart, and other big box brands could be, which is indicative of a transfer of wealth between classes. And also on that, if you're shutting down public spaces, someone explain to me why it was okay for us to be rioting in the streets during the BLM riots. And then in 2021, when the vaccine mandates were rolled out and Democrats wanted to confine people who were unvaccinated to house arrest, essentially, where was the constitutional authority for that? Where the mandates are to be followed, but not executive orders. Houses of worship were shut down. But unless I'm living in a different timeline, it's my understanding that the First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion and religious worship. And I'm not saying that precautions taken during the lockdowns weren't necessary. Don't misconstrue that. What I'm pointing out here is the hypocrisy of it. I'm pointing out that the fact that ultimately part of the problem which exists for this particular paradigm is that processes and procedures and rule of law, these papers which we hold as core values as a culture, as a country, as a society, all of these things technically do not exist insofar that as being, but rather as a state of mind, country and body. So mind, country, and body. But in that fact, they do not technically exist as sentient beings. Therefore, they cannot defend themselves. And it requires people to stand up for what's right. And anyone who has seen the movie National Treasure or has actually taken the time to read our Declaration of Independence, it clearly states, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. So essentially, that part of the Declaration of Independence is a loophole for the people of the United States to be able to read the Constitution and interpret the Constitution as times change. Now, the Constitution written over 200 years ago, the same dynamic of relationships, the thread of the actual fabric of the country, it's not the same as it was. Many, many, many things have changed. Relatively speaking, in comparison, as I've said before, with other countries, a relatively short period of time. I've heard a lot of people make fun of certain Democrats who have come forward and been like, well, we're still in our infancy. And they're like, well, the adults are back in the room. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that as a nation, as a culture, and as a society, we are still in our infancy. And I have been saying this for a very long time. I've said this on numerous of my videos. So, and in truth, that section of the Declaration of Independence is the heart of the debate. People are not neutral, nor are they processes. And the Democrats are using the same tactics as FDR in terms of packing the courts in respect to what happens to the balance of power between federal and state levels and what is agreed and disagreed upon as being constitutional or not. And if you're saying, well, send it to the Supreme Court, essentially you are leaving all of this power in the hands of the federal government, which is all well and good until something comes along that you don't like. Case in point, a lot of people were fine with the Supreme Court ruling that gay marriage was legal, but not a lot of them are fans of the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned or, first of all, being implemented for that fact. Many states had an issue with that. And if we as a republic were founded in such a way that the majority of the power was given to the states, that was the ideology behind the way that our country has been constructed, then why is it that we are only utilizing the branches of federal government to make these decisions, which affect everyone? This is a paradigm that I don't see a definitive solution for, because from where I'm sitting, I do not see the federal or states as sovereignty, but rather the bureaucracy that exists behind the scenes. And so what do I mean by bureaucracy? I mean, I have no problem with Doge uncovering a lot of this stuff if it proves to be true. Doge is not making any decisions, and I think that that's something that people don't realize. They're not making decisions. They are simply bringing to light certain things in regards to the way that our money is being spent on a federal level. In my experience, the only people who get mad when you set boundaries are the ones who were benefiting when you didn't have any. And that's exactly what's happening here. Doge is setting serious boundaries saying, well, you're spending this much on foreign aid, but you couldn't spend more on the people of this country who were, victims of natural disasters. That's boundary. And they're like, okay, you can't cross that again. And from what I'm seeing, 90% of the people who are outraged about this are Democrats. So if you are the protectors of democracy, as you claim to be, why are you okay with our money not being spent to help our citizens, the people who pay your salaries? So for me, as a former people pleaser, boundaries are everything, okay? And the truth is, it is no one's job not to cross your boundaries. It is your job to uphold them. So that is what is happening right now. And as always, I hope I have given you some food for thought. So are we in a constitutional crisis? In my opinion, no. Trump has not ignored any Supreme Court or federal judge ruling, for that matter. And if the Democrats are going to insist on packing the courts and adjudicating all of these executive orders in the courts, then we are in for a very, very long 4 years. If anyone is celebrating St. Pat's tomorrow, I hope you have a wonderful holiday. And as you slide down the banister of life, make sure the splinters are facing the other way.